Nurse Isabel Marlowe pulled a 19-year-old drunk driver back from the edge of cardiac arrest without knowing his last name. By the time she learned it, she'd already made an enemy of the most dangerous man in Boston. What came next wasn't retaliation. It was an obsession neither of them saw coming. The trauma bay at St. Aldrich's smelled the way it always did at 2 in the morning, antiseptic and burnt coffee, the low electronic chirp of monitors keeping time like a metronome nobody asked for. Isabel had been on her feet for 11 hours straight, and her scrubs were stiff with someone else's blood by the time the doors banged open and the gurney came through hot. Male, 19, single vehicle collision, back .22, possible internal bleeding. The paramedic rattled off, and Isabel was already moving, hands finding the boy's wrist before her eyes found his face. He was beautiful in the reckless, unfinished way boys that age sometimes were, dark curls plastered to his forehead with sweat and rain, a split lip, a designer jacket cut open by the paramedics and discarded on the floor like it meant nothing. He was also, Isabel noted, with the flat clinical part of her brain that never fully turned off, extremely lucky to be breathing. Enzo Castellano, he slurred when she asked his name, like it was supposed to mean something. You're gonna want to be nice to me. Isabel had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, with a mother who worked doubles at a diner, and a father who left before she could remember his face. She had put herself through nursing school on loans and grit, done a tour as an army combat medic in a place she didn't talk about at parties, and come home to work trauma because it was the only kind of chaos that made sense to her. Chaos with rules. Chaos she could fight back against with her hands. She did not respond well to threats, veiled or otherwise, from teenagers with blood alcohol levels 3 times the legal limit. I'm going to be exactly as nice as your chart requires, Mr. Castellano, she said, cutting his shirt open with brisk, economical movements. Which, right now, means an IV, a CT scan, and you keeping your mouth shut so I can listen to your lungs. He laughed, then winced, then glared at her with the particular fury of someone who had never once in his life heard the word no and meant to be furious about it now. Do you know who my father is? I know who's going to be the one deciding whether you go home tonight, Isabel said. And right now that's me. He didn't get better after that. He got worse, in the specific way spoiled, frightened boys get worse. Snide, then pleading, then, once the CT scan came back clean and the adrenaline started to fade, outright manipulative. He tried to charm the resident. He tried to guilt a med student. When none of that worked, he pulled a money clip thick enough to choke a horse out of what remained of his jacket and tried to hand it to Isabel like a tip. For the trouble, he said. And maybe you forget to write down exactly how much I had to drink. My father doesn't need to see that part. Isabel looked at the cash for exactly 1 second before she pushed his hand back toward his own lap. Everything that happens in this bay gets documented, Mr. Castellano. Every drop of alcohol, every decision you made tonight that could have gotten someone killed. That's not a courtesy I'm willing to skip for you or anyone else. You have no idea what you just did, he said, quiet now, some of the drunken bravado draining out of his face and leaving something colder underneath. I did my job, Isabel said, and moved on to her next patient, because in her experience, the ones who threatened you with consequences rarely followed through nearly as fast as the ones who said nothing at all. She was wrong about that, as it turned out, but not in the way she expected. By the time her shift supervisor, Preston Holloway, called her into his office the next morning, she'd already forgotten the boy's name. Holloway had not. Tell me you didn't put a formal alcohol abuse flag and a mandatory psych hold recommendation on Enzo Castellano's chart, Holloway said. He was a heavyset man who liked to think of himself as unshakable, and right now he looked like he hadn't slept. I put exactly what the labs and my assessment supported, Isabel said. He was a danger to himself and possibly others. That's protocol, Preston. You know that. Do you have any idea whose son that is? Holloway's voice cracked on the last word. That's Julian Castellano's boy. Julian Castellano, Isabel. The man who owns half the Port Authority contracts on the Eastern Seaboard and every judge who's ever been useful to him. People who cross that family don't get sued. They get disappeared. Isabel felt something cold slide down her spine, but the stubborn thread that had carried her through every hard thing in her life, through the army, through nursing school on ramen and 4 hours of sleep, through a childhood that had taught her nobody was coming to save her, held firm. I'm not changing my documentation. If the family wants their son evaluated by someone else, that's their right. But my name is on that chart, and it's accurate. You're going to get us both killed, Holloway said, but she was already walking out the door, because her shift had ended 20 minutes ago and she had a bus to catch. She never made it to the bus stop. The black SUV was idling at the curb outside the staff parking lot, engine humming low and expensive, rain sliding off its tinted windows in sheets. 2 men stepped out before she'd even registered the vehicle as a threat. Not thugs, not the kind of men who yelled or postured, but something quieter and far more unsettling, dressed in tailored dark suits that didn't quite disguise the shapes underneath their jackets. Marlowe, the taller one said, and it wasn't a question. Mr. Castellano would like a word. Tell Mr. Castellano to make an appointment through hospital administration, Isabel said, already calculating exits. The way her army training had taught her to do without thinking, even 6 years and a whole different life removed from Fort Bragg. I'm afraid that's not on the table tonight, the man said, and something about the flat, patient way he said it told her that arguing further would waste time she didn't have. She got in the car. The drive out of the city took 40 minutes past the harbor and up into the wooded hills north of Marblehead, until the SUV turned through a set of iron gates that opened without a sound and revealed a sprawling stone and glass compound perched on a cliff over the Atlantic. It didn't look like money trying to prove itself. It looked like money that had stopped needing to. They walked her through a hall lined with art that probably cost more than her student loans, to a set of double doors that opened into an office smelling of leather, old books, and rain through an open window. A man stood with his back to her, looking out over the black, churning water. When he turned, Isabel's breath caught in a way she immediately resented. Julian Castellano was somewhere in his early 40s, dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes so dark they looked like they absorbed light instead of reflecting it. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearm, like a man who'd spent the evening doing something that required his hands. "Nurse Marlowe," he said. His voice was low, deliberate, the kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself to be obeyed. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't given a choice." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. He crossed to his desk and picked up a folder. Her chart notes on Enzo, she realized, somehow already printed and in his hands. "My son says you humiliated him, flagged him like a criminal, tried to have him committed." Isabel's spine went rigid with something closer to anger than fear now. "Your son was legally drunk, uninsured against his own recklessness, and tried to bribe a medical professional to falsify his chart. I documented exactly what happened. If that embarrassed him, that's a conversation you should have with him, not me." The 2 guards by the door stiffened at her tone. Julian lifted one finger, and they went still as statues. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind those dark eyes. Not the anger she'd braced for, but a slow, dangerous curiosity. "You're not wrong," he said finally. "That's the problem." Isabel blinked. "Excuse me." Julian set the folder down and walked around the desk, closing the distance between them with unhurried, deliberate steps that made her want to retreat and refuse to let herself do it in equal measure. Enzo has spent 19 years surrounded by people who are terrified of me. Teachers who pass him without earning it. Doctors who write whatever prescription keeps him quiet. Everyone in his life bows, Nurse Marlowe, because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. His jaw tightened, and for a moment the composed mask slipped, revealing something rawer underneath. "I run an organization with more enemies than I can count, all of them waiting for a single crack in my family to exploit. If my son can't survive an emergency room without trying to buy his way out of consequences, he will not survive what's coming for this family when I'm gone." "You're telling me you're not angry I flagged him. I'm telling you that you are the first person in a decade who's told a Castellano no and meant it." His gaze moved over her face, slow and assessing in a way that made her pulse do something inconvenient. "I require that. I intend to make use of it." "Use of it how?" "Enzo has a substance problem that everyone around him has been paid or frightened into ignoring. I want him sober, disciplined, and fit to inherit something he currently has no idea how to protect. You are going to be his recovery monitor. Nightly check-ins at this estate, oversight of his sobriety, whatever medical structure you deem necessary. You will not be gentle with him. That is, in fact, the entire point. I have a full-time job at a hospital, Mr. Castellano. I have a life. I'll pay you 10 times your hospital salary, arrange whatever leave you require, and guarantee your safety and your career for as long as you live in this city." He said it the way other men ordered coffee, an inevitability, not a negotiation. "And if I refuse?" He moved before she registered it, closing the last of the distance until she was backed against the leather armchair behind her, one large hand braced on its arm beside her waist, close enough that she could smell rain and cedar and something underneath that was purely, dangerously him. "I don't accept refusals easily," he said low, right at her ear. "But I suspect, Nurse Marlowe, that you're about to find out you don't particularly want to give me one." She hated that he was right. She hated more that some reckless, unprofessional corner of herself recognized the same stubborn fire in him that had gotten her through every hard year of her own life, and wanted to know what that fire looked like up close. "Fine," she said finally, voice steadier than she felt. "But I do this my way. No bribes, no shortcuts, and if your son so much as looks at a bottle, I report it, family or no family." Something dangerous and pleased moved across Julian Castellano's face. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The first 2 weeks at the Castellano estate were a war of attrition. Enzo treated the sunroom she'd claimed as her workspace like a holding cell, arriving late, answering in monosyllables, testing every boundary she set. On the 4th night, he slid a slim gold watch across the table and told her it was hers if she'd just signed off on his sobriety early, so he could get back to his life. Isabel picked the watch up, turned it over once in the light, and set it gently into the wastebasket beside her chair without breaking eye contact. "In the real world, Enzo, bribery requires subtlety. Sit down. We're doing the breathing exercises again, and then you're going to tell me, honestly this time, what you were actually feeling the night you got behind the wheel." That was the night something in him cracked open, just slightly. Not surrender, not yet, but the first flicker of a boy who had never once had to face himself without a safety net, encountering a wall his father's money couldn't blow a hole through. Slowly, over the following weeks, the arrogance began peeling back to reveal something sharper underneath, a mind that had simply never been asked to work before. He started showing up on time. He started arguing with her about the actual substance of his recovery plan instead of complaining about having one. He started, in small and grudging ways, to respect her. But it wasn't only Enzo who kept finding reasons to be near her. Julian was a constant presence in the house without ever quite hovering. She'd look up from her notes to find him in the doorway, a glass of something amber in one hand, watching her with an intensity that left her flustered and irritated in equal measure. Their conversations were brief and charged, full of a current neither of them acknowledged, and every one of them stripped away a little more of the professional distance she was trying so hard to maintain. It happened on a Thursday night in early spring, the rain coming down hard against the windows, after Enzo had finally worked through a genuinely difficult session and gone up to bed, exhausted but proud of himself for the first time Isabel had witnessed. "You're performing a miracle in this house." Julian's voice came from the shadowed end of the room, and Isabel startled, clutching her folder to her chest. "He's doing the work," she said. "I just keep pointing him at it." Julian stepped into the lamplight, jacket discarded somewhere, sleeves rolled, looking tired in a way she hadn't seen on him before, something almost human underneath the armor. "I believe we've spent enough nights in these trenches together to drop the formalities, Julian." He stopped close enough that the air between them felt charged, thick with rain and expensive scotch, and something more dangerous than either. Isabel looked up into eyes that carried a heaviness she recognized, the particular exhaustion of someone holding too much together for too many other people. "You look tired," she said before she could stop herself. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes, something in his expression softening by degrees. "My world is complicated right now," he murmured, reaching up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the casual intimacy of it sending heat straight through her. "This room, watching you rebuild something out of my son that I thought was already lost. It's the only quiet I have left in this city." She knew she should step back. She was a civilian, an outsider, a woman who had built her entire adult life around rules precisely, so she'd never again feel as powerless as she had as a kid with no one coming to help. But looking at the exhaustion under Julian Castellano's armor, the rules suddenly felt very far away. She was leaning into his hand when the study doors slammed open. Silas, the head of Julian's security, stood in the frame, face pale, hand already on the holster at his hip. "Boss, we have a problem. The Brennans hit the Chelsea warehouse 20 minutes ago, and our people on the ground think they know about the nurse." Julian's entire demeanor changed in the space of a breath. Whatever softness had been in his face vanished, replaced by something cold and lethal. "Lock the perimeter. Get Enzo to the safe room now. What's happening?" Isabel's voice rose, panic tightening her throat. "The Brennans think taking you gives them leverage over me." Julian's hand closed around hers, pulling her toward a hidden elevator behind the bookshelves, and in one fluid motion produced a pistol from a shoulder holster she hadn't even known was there. "You are under my protection. They are about to learn exactly what that costs people." They didn't stay at the estate. Julian knew a stationary target was a dead one. He put Isabel into the back of an armored SUV, sliding in beside her as his driver Emmett tore down the winding drive and smashed through the front gates onto the rain-slick coastal road. "Keep your head down," Julian said, low and steady, his hand covering hers where it gripped the leather seat. They didn't make it to the highway. Two trucks emerged from a side road with their high beams blazing, ramming the SUV hard enough to send Isabel slamming into Julian's chest. He wrapped himself around her instinctively as the armored glass spiderwebbed under the impact. Gunfire erupted, a heartbeat, later automatic weapons chewing through the night, and Emmett was firing back through a gun port while Julian shoved his door open and used it as a shield. Isabel watched, frozen, as the composed, dangerous man she'd been circling for weeks became something else entirely. Precise, merciless, utterly without hesitation. But they were outnumbered, and she could see it in the tightening of his jaw as he reloaded. Then Emmett went down. A round caught him through the shoulder as he twisted to return fire, and he dropped hard against the wheel well, blood already soaking through his jacket in a way that told Isabel. The part of her that had spent a year patching soldiers back together in far worse conditions than this, exactly how little time they had. She was out of the vehicle before she'd consciously decided to move. "Isabel, get down." Julian's voice cracked with something close to panic, but she was already on her knees beside Emmett, hands finding the wound with the same cold, practiced speed that had kept a dozen soldiers alive under fire that was worse than this. She stripped off her jacket, packed it hard against the entry wound, found his radial pulse thin but present, and pressed his own hand over the packing to hold pressure while bullets sparked off the SUV's plating 6 feet away. "Stay with me, she said, low and even, the same voice she'd used in a place she never talked about, and something in Julian's face, watching her work under fire without flinching, without a single wasted motion, cracked wide open with an expression that had nothing to do with the gunfight at all. That was when the engine roared behind them. A reinforced truck tore around the bend and slammed into the lead pickup, sending it spinning into the ditch in a shower of sparks. A tactical team spilled out and overwhelmed what remained of the Brennan crew within seconds. Julian kept his weapon raised, chest heaving, until a slim figure stepped down from the passenger side, soaked through, holding a tablet in shaking hands. It was Enzo. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Julian's voice broke on the question, terror and fury tangled together. Applying critical thinking, Dad. Enzo's voice shook, but his eyes were clear and sharp, in a way Isabel had never seen from him before. Isabel taught me to look for what doesn't add up. The warehouse hit didn't make sense as a real target. Too loud, too easy to trace. It was a diversion. I pulled the traffic cam footage and found their staging point near the coastal road 20 minutes before the first call came in. I called the response team myself. He hadn't been the reckless boy from the trauma bay in weeks. He'd been paying attention. He'd grown into someone capable of saving all their lives. And he had. Julian looked at his son with an expression caught somewhere between pride and disbelief, giving him a single sharp nod that said more than words could have. Then he turned back to Isabel, still on her knees on the wet pavement beside Emmett, whose color was already coming back under her hands, and something in his face broke entirely. "I'll have Silas get you to the airport tonight," he said, voice rough. "New identity, funded, wherever you want to go. You never have to see this world again." Isabel looked at the wreckage, at Enzo directing the strike team with a calm authority that hadn't existed in him a month ago, at Emmett breathing steady under her hands. Then she looked up at Julian, soaked and blooded and more afraid in that moment than he'd been through the entire firefight. "I don't abandon my patients," she said, quiet, but absolutely certain, "and I don't run from the people who put themselves between me and a bullet." Something raw tore loose in Julian's chest. He crossed the distance between them and pulled her up into his arms, kissing her like the last 5 weeks of restraint had finally given out entirely. Desperate, consuming tasting of rain and gunpowder, and something that felt disturbingly close to relief. 6 months later, the R at St. Ulrich's was exactly as loud and chaotic as it had always been, and Isabel Marlowe was exactly where she wanted to be. She was charting at the nurse's station when a familiar figure walked through the sliding doors, no longer in a torn designer jacket but a crisp button-down, a leather folder tucked under one arm. "I got into the business program at Georgetown," Enzo said, and there was nothing arrogant left in the way he said it, just quiet, hard-earned pride. "Early admission. I leave in the fall. You earned every bit of it," Isabel said, and meant it completely. He hesitated at the door, glancing back. "Thank you, Nurse Marlowe. Or Isabel, I guess now. Go build something worth protecting, Enzo." He smiled, a real one, unguarded, and left. Isabel finished her chart, clocked out, and walked toward the staff parking lot, where a black SUV sat idling behind her old sedan, rain sliding gently down its windows in the golden hour light. Julian Castellano leaned against the hood in a dark suit, that same devastating, dangerous smile on his face. He wasn't there to intimidate anyone this time. He was there to take his wife home. Isabel crossed the lot, laced her fingers through his, and let the city fall quiet around them the way it only ever seemed to when he was near.